Welcome to the deep dive. We take deep dives into some pretty fascinating, often complex topics. Today, we're diving into a case that's, well, it's both heartbreaking and incredibly perplexing. The deaths of the Tote family in Celebration, Florida.
Ah, yes. The Tote family.
You might recall this case from the news a few years back. It seemed like this idyllic family was found dead in their home, but the father, Tony, is alive, and his story, well, let's just say it keeps changing.
And that's what makes this case so fascinating, so disturbing.
Exactly. We're going to be examining police statements, a note that was found at the scene, and even jailhouse calls.
We're really going to try to make sense of it all.
It's like we're putting together this puzzle, but the pieces just, they don't quite fit, and the picture, well, it just keeps shifting.
It's a real challenge.
So are you ready to put on your detective hats and join us as we try to unravel this really tragic mystery?
I think what makes this case so compelling and disturbing is that contrast, right? You have Celebration, Florida, designed to be this picture-perfect town.
Like a vision of Americana.
Exactly. And yet, it becomes this backdrop for this horrific tragedy.
What adds a layer of, I don't know, unease to the whole thing, like a crack in this facade of perfection, revealing something much darker underneath. So let's start at the beginning. January 13th, 2020, federal agents are at the Tote's house to arrest Tony for insurance fraud.
Okay.
They've been investigating him for months, and he just vanished, seemingly, from his Connecticut practice.
Wow.
They finally locate him, and he is disheveled, unwell, and acting very strangely.
This is a detail to remember as we move forward, right? Tony's state of mind, even before the bodies are found, raises all sorts of questions about his well-being and his ability to, to even function rationally.
It's a red flag.
It is, even if it's not immediately obvious why.
And it gets even more unsettling because Tony's sister had requested multiple wellness checks on the family. They had been unusually quiet, and she was worried. Especially after Megan, Tony's wife, made some disturbing comments about the world ending.
See, this is where things start to get murky. On one hand, families do go through periods of, limited communication, especially if they travel a lot, which apparently the Totes did.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, coupled with Tony's, his erratic behavior, this talk from Megan, it's definitely something that should have been looked into.
Absolutely. And those concerns become tragically valid when officers enter the house.
Yeah.
Inside, they find Megan, along with their 3 children, 13-year-old Alec, 11-year-old Tyler, and 4-year-old Zoe.
All deceased?
All deceased.
Yeah.
Even the family dog, Breezy, is found dead.
Oh, gosh.
A horrific scene. And even more chilling, Zoe wasn't immediately visible. Her body had been, hidden among some blankets with the other bodies. What do you make of that?
That's a detail forensic investigators would zero in on for sure.
Yeah.
Was she deliberately concealed? Or was it, simply her small body being overlooked in the initial chaos at the scene? It's a question that would need to be thoroughly explored to understand the full context of what happened.
Absolutely. And then there's the note, typed, which is unusual, and the point of view. Well, it shifts throughout. It talks about a family decision for salvation, choosing death to avoid the tortures of some impending apocalypse.
The note, just the discovery of it introduces this whole other possibility, a shared delusion or an extreme belief system.
Right.
The language is apocalyptic. You get the sense that there's a level of indoctrination that could have led a family to such a drastic measure.
It's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
The note also mentions Megan's health problems. She was struggling with Lyme disease, liver issues, and even the emotional toll of multiple miscarriages, her father's suicide years earlier. It even mentions a fear of someone named Robert, who, we'll learn more about him later.
Okay.
But here's what I find perplexing. The note talks about Tony being with them always and forever.
Okay.
But he's alive.
Right. That's one of the inconsistencies that jumps out at you. If this was a planned family suicide, as the note suggests, why is Tony still here? It challenges the entire premise.
It feels like a crucial piece of the puzzle is missing. And then there are Tony's confessions, which take us further down the rabbit hole.
Oh, boy.
At the hospital, he gives his first account of what happened. It's a chilling tale. He claims that he and Megan, they'd been researching the afterlife.
Yeah.
And decided that they had to die together. He admits to killing the children over a 2-day period, describing specific details like putting pie laced with Benadryl, stabbings, suffocation, arranging the bodies for comfort.
See, and here's where we run into a problem with Tony's story. The autopsy. It shows that the stab wounds found on the children, they were inflicted post-mortem, after they had already died. This directly contradicts Tony's initial claim.
Wow. That's a huge red flag. If he's lying about something as significant as that, What else is he fabricating?
It really makes you question everything he says, like the ground beneath our feet just shifted.
And this is just the beginning. Stay with us as we delve deeper into this unsettling case. We'll uncover more twists and turns, examine Tony's shifting accounts, and explore those potential motives behind this horrifying family tragedy. We left off with, well, a bombshell. The autopsy showed that the stab wounds on the Tote children were inflicted after death, which directly contradicts Tony's confession.
Yeah, this really throws a wrench into his version of events.
It does. It begs the question, if he's lying about the stabbings, what else is he not being truthful about, and why?
Well, I think there are some psychological factors that might be at play here, you see.
Okay.
Sometimes in cases like this, the perpetrator, they feel this need to exert some control over how the story's told, even if it means, admitting to a smaller role. It's a twisted form of manipulation.
So he's trying to shape the narrative, even if it means incriminating himself. Wants to be seen as a participant, but not the mastermind.
Exactly. And that need for control, that often stems from a deep-seated narcissism, which, as we'll see, is a recurring theme in Tony's behavior.
Let's talk about the note again. We know it mentions Megan's health issues and this cryptic fear of someone named Robert. Anything else in there that might offer some insights into what happened?
Well, the note is really fascinating because it provides, it's a glimpse into their state of mind, or at least the state of mind that the author wants us to believe they were in, right? Remember, the point of view in the note, it shifts throughout, and the language is highly emotional, a bit disjointed, you could say.
It almost feels like the author's trying a little too hard to convince us of their despair and their belief in this whole apocalypse thing.
That brings up another question. Was the note a genuine expression of their beliefs, or was it fabricated to support a specific narrative? Was this thing written to mislead investigators?
So it's a piece of evidence that can be interpreted in a bunch of different ways. It just adds another layer of complexity to this case.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to look at everything with a critical eye. Consider all the different perspectives. We can't just accept any piece of information at face value, especially when we're dealing with a suspect who we know is capable of deception.
Okay. Let's get back to Tony's confessions. He gives a second one, adding in all these details about Megan having these visions of this terrifying apocalypse and claiming they wanted to avoid being separated, subjected to all these, horrific events. And then he even goes so far as to say that the kids were in on it, even recalling a conversation where they chose death over living without their parents.
I mean, come on.
Yeah, how credible is that?
This is where I think the manipulation and potential coercion is really apparent. You gotta remember the power dynamic here, right? Tony, the father figure, is claiming that his young children, 13, 11, and 4, actively participated in this decision to end their lives.
It just seems so far-fetched. Even if Megan was truly convinced of this apocalyptic scenario, how could she involve her children in such a drastic decision?
I think it's important to consider that Megan herself might have been manipulated by Tony. We know he was capable of deception, and he definitely had a motive to shift the blame.
Which brings us to Tony's complete reversal during the jailhouse phone calls.
Oh, yeah.
He suddenly claims that it was Megan who killed the kids while he was asleep at their condo. It's like he completely flipped the script.
Classic tactic, really. It's used by abusers and manipulators all the time. When they're confronted with evidence of their own guilt, they try to demonize the victim, paint them as the aggressor.
But his story doesn't add up with what we know about Megan. I mean, neighbors and friends described her as a loving mother. There's no indication she was capable of such violence.
That's why it's so crucial to look at all the evidence. Not just what Tony is saying, but the patterns of behavior, the inconsistencies in his statements. We have to look at the bigger picture.
And speaking of patterns, there's a big revelation that just adds this whole new dimension to this case.
Tony's father, Robert.
Yeah, his dad.
His story is it's a disturbing echo of the tragedy that unfolds with Tony. You see, Robert was actually convicted of trying to have his wife, Tony's mother, murdered.
Wait, so Tony's father tried to have his mother killed?
He did. And the details are really chilling. Robert was having an affair, was engaged to another woman, and hired a former student of his to shoot his wife in the face. And get this, all while young Tony was home.
Oh my God. So Tony witnessed this violence firsthand as a child.
It seems so. It really makes you think about the impact that this trauma must have had on him. Could this be the root of his distorted view of relationships, his capacity for violence, his manipulative tendencies?
It's a cycle of violence repeating itself across generations.
And it adds yet another layer of complexity to understanding Tony's motivations. We can't just ignore the influence of his childhood.
No, you're right. It's not an excuse for his behavior, but it does offer a glimpse into the origins of his darkness, you know.
Exactly. It's a reminder that our past experiences, especially those involving trauma, can really have a lasting effect on who we become.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, and each layer is just more disturbing than the last.
And just when you think you've reached the core, there's another twist waiting to be uncovered. Remember that 27-page letter Tony wrote to his father from prison?
Oh, yeah, the one where he's proclaiming his innocence, blaming the media, the whole thing.
Well, it's an interesting read, that's for sure. But it's also full of contradictions. On one hand, he says he has no memory of the events, but then he gives this detailed account.
Right.
And he's still insisting that Megan is responsible, emphasizing her illness to this, well, almost absurd degree.
It's like he's living in this alternate reality where he's the victim and Megan is the villain.
And his tone, condescending, self-aggrandizing, it just screams narcissistic personality disorder. Like he truly believes that he is smarter than everyone else, that he can manipulate the system and he'll come out on top.
It's scary. But despite all of his efforts, the evidence against him was overwhelming.
And that leads us to the trial itself, where Tony's manipulative tendencies and his narcissism are on full display.
Last we left off, his web of lies and manipulations was starting to unravel. The evidence was mounting, and his attempts to blame Megan, well, they were getting pretty flimsy. So let's pick up the story at the trial.
Yeah, the trial itself was almost a study in human behavior, especially Tony's. Despite facing overwhelming evidence, he took the stand, stuck with that story that Megan was the one responsible.
That seems like a risky move.
Yeah.
Considering how many times his story had already changed.
It was definitely a gamble. But it really shows you how much Tony believed that he could control things, even in a courtroom.
Yeah.
He underestimated the jury and overestimated himself.
And how did that work out for him?
Well, not so well. His behavior on the stand was described as, well, arrogant, condescending. He was evasive, dismissive, especially during cross-examination.
Sounds like his attempts to manipulate the jury backfired.
They did. And this type of behavior aligns with what we know about narcissistic personality disorder. You see, people with this disorder, they often have this grandiose sense of self-importance, lack of empathy, a chronic need for admiration and control. They can be incredibly skilled manipulators, but their tactics, they usually fall apart when they're challenged.
So Tony, even when it was clear it wasn't working, he just couldn't stop manipulating.
It's like it was just ingrained in him.
What was the jury's verdict?
Well, after deliberating for days, they found Tony guilty on all counts, 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of animal cruelty for the death of the family dog, Breezy.
Wow. Guilty on all counts, even after all of his attempts to deflect blame, to manipulate everyone.
I think the jury saw right through it all. The evidence, his behavior, it all pointed to a calculated and callous killer.
And how did Tony react to the verdict?
Well, true to form, he remained defiant, maintained his innocence, gave this rambling, incoherent statement to the court, kept blaming Megan, railed against the justice system.
So even then, he couldn't let go, couldn't stop manipulating.
It's like he was clinging to it.
Yeah.
He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus an additional year for Breezy's death. And of course, he filed an appeal, still hoping he could somehow get the verdict overturned.
It's tragic. But even though Tony is behind bars, there are still so many questions. What motivated him?
Yeah.
Was Megan involved, or was she just another victim of his manipulation? We may never know.
That's what makes cases like this so haunting. You're left trying to make sense of it all. The darkness, the manipulation, the violence.
Throughout this whole case, I keep thinking about the note. The apocalyptic language. The fear of Robert. There's this undercurrent of paranoia and delusion that just runs through the entire story.
That's a good point. It makes you wonder if Tony's actions were just about narcissism and control, or if there was something else going on, something more. We know that Megan had been talking about the world ending, and the note, it definitely reflects those anxieties.
So Tony could have used that, exploited those fears to his advantage.
Yeah. It's a chilling thought, but, it's definitely plausible. He took Megan's fears and use them as justification for his plan.
A reminder that manipulation can be so subtle, and it often targets those closest to us.
It does, and that's why it's so important to recognize the signs, to get help if you or someone you know is experiencing it.
This deep dive has been, well, it's been harrowing. It's a story that really makes you question things, and it leaves us with more questions than answers.
It does. But even in all of this darkness, there's still hope. By learning from these tragedies, raising awareness, supporting families, we can work to prevent them from happening again.
And to our listener, if there's one thing you take away from this deep dive, it's this. Pay attention, trust your instincts, and never, ever be afraid to reach out for help.
You are not alone. There are people who care, and there is a path towards healing and safety.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope that by exploring this dark story, we can inspire hope, awareness, and action.